This demo will show you not only how to print an intaglio plate, but also how to transfer the image from one plate to another for a multi-plate print. Every printmaker has their own method for printing, so it's okay if you modify or change parts of this. Before you print, put your paper on to soak. It should already be torn to size. How long the paper needs to soak will depend on the character of the paper. For a thicker cotton rag paper, generally around 45 minutes. Cotton rag paper is usually fine in water for up to a day before it starts to disintegrate. The paper needs to be soaked to make it pliable enough to press down into the incised areas of the plate and absorb the ink. An alternative to soaking the paper prior to printing is to make a damp pack. I like to mark the back side of the paper with an X, so I can tell the back from the front when I'm ready to print. The back will have a mesh-like pattern. The front will be irregular. If you don't have a tray large enough to soak the paper flat, you can gradually bend it in the middle as it absorbs water. Take care not to crease the paper as you bend it. Be sure the paper is entirely submerged. I prefer to use a hot plate to loosen ink on the surface of the plate. It doesn't need to be fancy, an electric griddle will work. Some printmakers prefer to modify their ink with Easy Wipe or just use the ink straight from the can and spend more time wiping with the tarlatan. I heat the hot plate until it is warm to the touch, but not so hot that I can't handle the plate. Set the plate on the hotbed to warm, with a sheet of newsprint underneath to help keep the hot plate clean. This also helps with moving the warm plate around later on. Today I am printing with Graphic Chemical Renaissance Black. As you remove ink from the can, do so in a smooth manner. Do not gouge the ink. Gouging the ink creates a larger surface area of ink exposed to air, so more of it will dry out. Think of it like frosting a cake, but in reverse. Begin by working the ink. Pick out any dry ink boogers. Moving the ink around warms it up and homogenizes it. I have added a small bit of plate oil to make the ink a little looser. Use a square scrap of mapboard to apply the ink to the plate using C shapes. You can also use an old shopper's card or a plastic scraper for this, but then you have to clean them later. The heat from the hot plate helps the ink move more easily. Turn the plate so that the side you are inking overhangs the edge of the hot plate. This keeps things tidier because you aren't pulling ink off onto the hot plate. Do not apply all the ink from the same angle. Use different directions for the best coverage. Even if you only have lines in one isolated area, you still need to ink the entire plate. If you don't, the negative space in the inked areas will have plate tone, but the areas you don't ink won't. Once you have inked the entire plate, use the mapboard to scrape off extra ink on the surface. Now it is time to wipe the plate. From now on, do your best not to touch the surface of the plate anymore. Begin with the tarlatan. This is a piece of cheesecloth that has been stiffened using starch. Wad the tarlatan so that the folds of fabric sort of fill the bowl shape you are making. This smooth outside part of the bowl is what will make contact with the plate. Work to create a flat surface that is free of folds, wrinkles, or seams with which to wipe. As you wipe, keep your wrist straight and use a dusting motion that begins and ends off of the plate, not a dragging, sluggish pull. If the tarlatan becomes shiny or you notice thick areas of ink, rework it into a new pad so that it appears matte and absorbent. If your plate becomes too hot, the ink will loosen too much and you risk over-wiping. If the plate cools too much, the ink will grow sluggish and resistant. Often this means taking the plate on and off the hot plate as you work. Tarlatan is the first step. It moves the ink around and evens out how much is left on the surface. This is about how much ink is removed when it's time to move on to the next step. Next is palm wiping. This is the most important part of wiping a plate. The palm of the hand is the absolute best for removing ink from the surface while still leaving it in the recessed areas of the plate. Palm wiping is what gives a print its luminosity. I've marked the areas of the palm that make contact with the plate. Do not smack your hand against the plate and pull. Like with tarlatan, this is also a light dusting motion. Your wrist will remain straight while you palm wipe. If your hands are damp or sweaty, you can apply a little cornstarch to dry them. Typically, unless a plate is very large, I brace it against my hip or stomach as I wipe. Periodically, your hand will become too coated in ink and you will need to wipe it clean. I use the side of my apron, but a rag could work as well. Pay special attention to the edges. This is where it is most common to see ink left behind. Expect this to take time. This area of the plate has too much ink left on the surface and needs to be wiped some more. This last step I only use for line-etched plates. I do not paper wipe on aquatints, engravings, mezzotints, or any other type of plate that has delicate qualities or burrs of any sort. When paper wiping, do not wad the paper at all, but leave it flat and flush with the plate. Use phone book paper for this. This is especially nice for large open areas and speeds up the wiping process. This is easiest if you already have some ink on your palm so that the paper sticks to it. Lastly, wipe the edges of the plate with a rag. This is just an old cotton t-shirt. Wipe in a downward motion and keep an eye out for any ink that might move to the surface of the plate. Palm wipe it away if that happens. Every plate will have its own character, and the only way to figure out what that is to print it. If the backing on your plate becomes damaged or melted, it's okay to remove it. It's only needed during the etching process. Check the plate once more, and palm wipe any areas that need a touch-up. Pay particular attention to the edges. Set your plate on the warmer to keep the ink loose. Do not leave your plate sitting here for an extended period of time or you risk baking the ink. Just a few minutes to keep the ink warm. In the meantime, set the pressure on the press and lay out the registration grid. If you're transferring an image to a second plate, have the second plate standing by. It should be clean and degreased. Once the plate is warm to the touch, set it on the registration grid, taking care to line up the arrow on the back with the arrow on the grid. These arrows are your touchstone. If you notice something is misaligned or off, the arrows remind you to consistently measure off of that particular corner. So with any luck, at least everything will be consistently off. With the press set up, stop and wash your hands. Next, blot your paper using a clean towel. This towel should be well washed so it doesn't deposit fluff onto the paper, which would interfere with the print. Lay the paper print side up on the towel. Fold the towel over and rub the back lightly. Then shift the towel and repeat once. You want the paper pretty damp, but without any water sitting on the surface that would interfere with the ink's ability to bond with the paper. If you are printing on a delicate paper, misting it with water and then blotting works. Move quickly to the press so the plate stays warm and the paper stays damp, and line the paper up using the registration grid. Lay down a sheet of newsprint to protect the felts and run the plate through the press with good pressure. Never pause as you run the plate through the press. You may end up with a line in your print. A steady speed is best. To transfer the image on your first plate to the second plate, carefully remove the newsprint without shifting the print. Before lifting the print, lay something heavy along the side of the paper or tape it down so it stays in place. If working on a steel bed, you can use rare earth magnets. Gently fold the print out of the way and remove the first plate. Replace it with the second plate, being sure to measure off the corner that has the arrows. Carefully fold the paper back over the plate. It's a good idea to always run the plate through the press facing the same way, so if it skips in the same direction. You can move the plate by holding the paper in place and moving the registration grid. Double check all the corners to see if they are in the right place. Then run the plate back through the press. The wet ink from the first plate will transfer to the second plate. Here is the first plate with the key image on it. Here is the second plate. Nothing has been changed on this plate, it just has ink sitting on the surface. Take this second plate and dip it in the mordant for 2 to 3 minutes. I'm using day-old mordant, so I added a little salt to heat it back up. This will tarnish the areas of the plate that do not have any ink on them. Once you remove the ink with baby oil, you will be able to see a pale version of your key image on the plate. Use the information transferred to the second plate as a guide. If you wanted your second plate to have a line etch on it, the only changes you would make to this process are to have the second plate grounded ahead of time. You would also need to either print the first plate in white ink so it's visible on the dark ground, or use the red-colored big ground instead of the black. All that's left now is to clean the ink and clean the first plate. Scrape up extra ink and save it if there's enough, or discard it if there isn't. Use baby oil to clean the ink slab and the knife. Remember to get all 5 sides of the knife. Degrease using watered-down dish soap. To clean ink off of a plate, use baby oil. It's fine to pour it directly on the plate. Wipe up using a paper towel. It's okay to leave the plate like this. Degreasing with watery dish soap could cause oxidation. Clean until the paper towels come away without much ink.